Welcome to this month's Portals Community Call. Happy New Year to all of you. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Jason Gumper from MS Dynamics World, and I'm really pleased to be able to host this event. Once again, it's always a pleasure to have Nicholas Hayduke with us to take us through these events. And as you may or may not know, we are recording today's event. We'll be making that available on demand after the session ends. You'll get a link for that. And we also welcome your questions during the session. So look for the questions block. You can enter them at any point. Nick's great about keeping an eye on those. I'll be on the lookout as well. And yeah, I think with that, we are ready to get started. Nick, I'll hand things over to you.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Happy New Year. And yeah, let's get into today's call. Our topic du jour is Dataverse and Power Pages. Um, it will be a somewhat this is kind of the audience that I'm somewhat targeting here are people that maybe don't know Dataverse as much and don't understand kind of how Power Pages depends on it. So maybe more level 100 than 400. So just a heads up that that's kind of just run into quite a few instances recently where people are like, well, I don't need Dataverse, so like how do I get that out of Power Pages? And as you'll see, as my kids like to say, not an option, not an option. Um, well, quick intro. If this is your first time joining us for a Portals community call, welcome. My name is Nicholas Hayduke. I'm the president and a software engineer with Engineered Code based here in Regina. We're a Microsoft partner that focuses on Power Pages implementations. We also have EC Learn, which is our learning management system built right into Dataverse and the Power Platform. Um, I began my career with ADX Studio way back in the day, and for those of you who aren't aware, that's the company that originally built what's now known as Power Pages, and Microsoft acquired them in 2015. So Power Pages is the primary focus of my career. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, you can kind of keep up to date on all the stuff that we do on kind of LinkedIn or X/Twitter. We have our blog, which I have a pretty good streak of doing once a month here for the last couple of years. So there's a blog you can check out. You can check out our YouTube channel where we do our weekly Power Pages tips as well as post the recordings of this call. And there's also at crm.audio, you'll find the Refresh the Cache podcast, again, all content related to Power Pages. So happy for you to connect with me or follow us on any of those platforms to get all the latest and greatest news about Power Pages. As always, I want to just say thank you to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World. I guess this would probably be considered our anniversary call. I think this is our 6-year anniversary. I believe the first one was in January of 2020. So yeah, it's been a great run, and looking forward to many more. So thanks to Jason and his team for all the support over the many years. It's been a good run, and shall it continue? Okay, so in terms of agenda, same as always, Portal news. Spoiler alert: there is no news. Not a shock, kind of that there wasn't a whole lot going on over the holiday period. So yeah, not really much news. Then we'll get into today's topic, which, as I mentioned, is Dataverse and Power Pages. And then we'll talk about the date and time of our next community call, and we will leave some time for Q&A. I suspect we'll have a little bit of time today with the kind of lack of other important news. As Jason mentioned, just use that questions block to drop any questions that you may have. Again, whether they're related to today's topic or not. If they're not related to today's topic, we'll probably tackle those at the end, but feel free to kind of jot those down, and I'll do my best to get you an answer on that. Let's get into the Portals news. As I said, nothing really new. Not too surprising. Our last call was beginning of December, so I believe the last news that showed up on the product team blog was about the server-side logic. If you haven't looked into that, very cool new technology that we have available in preview for Power Pages with the ability to write server-side JavaScript code that, from a security perspective, give you the options to do things that you can't really trust to do in a client-side environment. So yeah, if you haven't checked that out, certainly worth going to play around with, because that's going to be I think I've mentioned this before, but probably the biggest deal since the web API came out. So that's a very cool new functionality. So with that being said, let's talk about today's topic. So again, today we're talking about Dataverse and Power Pages. So what are we going to do? We're going to talk about what is Dataverse. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, um, this topic came up because a number of times recently we've been working with organizations that may be kind of new to the Power Platform and may not fully kind of grasp yet how kind of everything ties together. So we're going to kind of level set with like, okay, what is Dataverse? Why does it matter for Power Pages? What do we do about data that exists outside of Dataverse? And what are the features of Dataverse that Power Pages really uses? And then we'll kind of finish with like, okay, what are the key takeaways? So again, if you don't know what Dataverse is, then this is really a good session for you, and you're kind of interested in Power Pages. If you already know all about Dataverse, then just hold on for a few minutes as we kind of get into, then we'll talk about kind of the features of what Power Pages uses within Dataverse, as well as kind of accessing data from outside of Dataverse. So, what is Dataverse? That's a great question. It's a cloud-based platform for storing and managing data, and it is part of Microsoft's Power Platform. So, if you were to ask a Microsoft salesperson, they would probably, that they're going to point you towards Dataverse if anytime you want to store, any sort of relational database or any sort of kind of business data that should be relational in the cloud. There's a connector that you can use for things like Power Automate, Power BI. So while not one of the core products, like when you look at the core products of the Power Platform, we're looking at Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Pages, Copilot Studio. Like those are the kind of the four products. Dataverse is a piece that sits underneath most of those, or at least whether they're required or at least an optional component of that. So it is a key foundational piece to the Power Platform. At a very, very high level, kind of the simplest way to think about it, it's a database technology. Actually, under the hood, it uses a number of different types of storage technologies. But if you really want to keep things simple, if you think of it as a SQL database, like for many, for 80% of the time, that's kind of how it's acting, and that's actually kind of what's used under the hood is kind of Azure SQL or Microsoft SQL database. Files are stored in Azure Blob Storage. Logs are stored in Cosmos DB. So it's kind of a level of abstraction on top of a single database technology, kind of giving you the best of all the different sorts of the storage worlds that you may have. So for example, SQL database storage isn't cheap. That's why they've introduced, hey, like if you're saving a file rather than storing in the database, we're going to store in Azure Blob Storage. But as a user of Dataverse, it just looks like it's a column in the database. So again, easiest way to think of it is it's a database that we use, and kind of along the lines of a kind of a SQL database. But in addition to being that database, it offers a bunch of extra things that you get that you don't get out of a traditional database that you'd generally have to kind of build yourself. So when you're using Dataverse, it comes with the common data model. So that means it has things like contacts, accounts, activities, so tasks and emails and appointments and all those types of things. It has a data model that you can use to start, so that there's kind of consistency across the application, so that not everyone's creating an account or a company or an organization, those types of records. There's some out of the box that you can kind of build on top of. There's a built-in customizable security model. So if you're looking at something like just kind of more traditional Azure SQL, there's security built in there, but this has a security model meant for kind of end users of Dataverse. So the users of the application, there's a way to create security that will be enforced at the database level. Dataverse offers an API, like a web API that allows you to interact with it. And so again, if you think of just like a traditional SQL database, often that would be a layer you have to add on top if you wanted there to be a web API that you want to access. Dataverse just gives you that out of the box. It has the classic workflow functionality. So We know Power Automate is where kind of all the love seems to be these days, but classic workflow still exists, and so there's some kind of built-in workflow capabilities right in the platform. There's auditing functionality which exists within Dataverse. So there's things that you can check. You check a box and you get auditing. Something not in the same way that you'd get with, again, just kind of a database technology kind of out of the box. Dataverse has some search built in, so there's capabilities that allow you to do the Dataverse search, which allows you to kind of index the database and do that sort of thing. There's a specific ALM model, so that is solutions. So the fact that you can package up your changes to the data model or the security model, you can package those up into essentially a big zip file that contains all your things, move that between environments. That's another thing that Dataverse gives you, that just a regular database, there's just kind of different ways of doing it. So again, it is a database that's kind of the easiest way to think about it in terms of like the architecture of where, how it fits into an architecture diagram. But it's like a database plus all these features that you pretty much need on every project. So they're just kind of there out of the box for you, rather than you have to re-implement. Well, how am I going to, move my table customizations between environments in SQL? It's like, hey, I export I create SQL scripts to do that. This just, it's a lot more well-defined. So it's the computing world is all about layers of abstraction. It's kind of one layer of abstraction on top of kind of a traditional database. Now, so we've got a question from Shashay. Is Dataverse used with BC Nav? The short answer is no. So Dataverse, I'll give you a little bit of history of where Dataverse came from. So way back in the day, there was a product called Dynamics CRM. And actually, I'll maybe get a little bit of preview of what the next slide is. But so Dynamics CRM was Microsoft's CRM technology that they built, and they actually built it in-house. Now, many of the other product family members in the Dynamics space were acquisitions, whereas the Dynamics CRM product was something that Microsoft built in-house. And so the CRM that they built it on top of SQL, and they kind of built this way that you could extend the CRM and you could customize forms and views. And so Dynamics CRM eventually kind of grew up, and it became model-driven Power Apps, and it became Dataverse. So kind of old school, kind of traditional Dynamics CRM, that's where Dataverse came from. So none of the other kind of Dynamics technologies were built on that same platform. They all kind of existed separately from that. Now, I know that there's some technologies to do some kind of like writing between the two, whether that's like dual write that I think exists in F&O. I'm not sure what the exact answer is from BC, but I think there's always been a drive to see if we can get some of those other Dynamics applications using Dataverse a little bit more natively. I don't know, like maybe F&O has an option to go on Dataverse now. To be honest, I'm not totally sure on that. But the short answer is like, no, those other products, the other members of the Dynamics family are not built directly on Dataverse. And so if you're going to use something like Power Pages, and again, we'll kind of get into this in a little bit, if you're going to use something like Power Pages, you have to figure out how am I going to access the data of those things, because the things within the only kind of Dynamics platforms that use Dataverse are the kind of traditional CRM. So that's sales, customer service, customer insights. Those are the technologies that are built on top of Dataverse. So in this next time, I'm talking about here. There's kind of a gray area between like what is Dataverse and what is model-driven Power Apps. Again, this comes from the fact that they both originate from Dynamics CRM. So they weren't created as separate technologies. It was like, hey, we had this one big product, and then we kind of separated them out a little bit and say, hey, you can buy MDAs, but like an MDA requires you to have Dataverse. And things within Dataverse may have been kind of, you may think of them as part of MDAs. And again, the big gray areas are like forms and views. Are those like absolutely critical? That's what a model-driven app is. But there are now other things within the Power Platform that use those forms and views, such as Power Pages. And so some people would consider forms and views to be more of a Dataverse component that then are used by other parts of the Power Platform. Another one example would be business rules. Yes, business rules can impact how model-driven app forms are used, but if you have them even if you don't have a model-driven app, you can have those rules apply at kind of more the database level. So it's like, yeah, is it an MDA feature? Is it a Dataverse feature? For the purposes of today's call, we're just going to kind of assume all those things are part of Dataverse, just so we kind of refer to them. So, but again, it kind of goes back to the fact that Dataverse and model-driven apps were created as an original project. That it wasn't originally conceived to be separate things that you could untie. They were built as one thing, and so it's not as easy to just say, what is what. Okay, so let's talk about, why am I even talking about? What does this have to do with Power Pages? So here's a diagram that you get if you look at the white paper for the Power Pages architecture. Kind of the simplest kind of traditional architecture for a website is that you have a web server that then talks back to some sort of database. And in simple terms, when we talk about that for Power Pages, the web server is an Azure is a web app that exists in Azure, and the database is Dataverse. So you can see here we've got you got that Dataverse that kind of sits behind the Power Pages, that kind of box, and so Dataverse is the database for Power Pages. So as I mentioned, Dataverse is the base data store for Power Pages. This is where you configure things like security. So security for Power Pages relates to contacts. And then there are tables for web roles, table permissions. So you need to have Dataverse, because if Dataverse didn't exist, you'd have nowhere to say, here's the people who can log in. Here are the permissions for the people logging in. Much of the setup of Power Pages exists within Dataverse. So there's tables like site settings, website bindings. All those types of things are stored in Dataverse. The content of your site, so web pages, web files, content snippets, page templates, web templates, all of that stuff is stored in Dataverse. And there's even more. But the idea is that the primary main database that sits behind Dataverse, or behind Power Pages, is Dataverse. As I mentioned already, lists and forms, that's probably the most key feature that exists in Dataverse. Those are based on lists and views and forms that exist in Dataverse. Power Pages itself has no direct support for Power Platform connectors. So Dataverse is where Power Pages gets its data from. And another thing to note is that, I was kind of mentioning earlier that Dataverse isn't one of the main products within Power Pages. It's kind of like this fundamental aspect of Power Pages that many of those products depend on, but it's not itself kind of its own standalone product generally. So that means Power Pages licenses include entitlements to Dataverse. So that question came up a little while ago. It's like, well, how much do I got to pay for Dataverse? Now, you sometimes do have to pay extra for Dataverse, but it comes from a capacity level. So based on the licenses that you buy for Power Pages or other products, many of the products within the Power Platform include entitlements for Dataverse, and really those entitlements come in terms of API calls or storage. So again, anyone who has kind of a base number of Power Platform licenses will have a base level of Dataverse storage and API requests. And as you buy Power Pages licenses, that increases. So generally, the idea is, if you're in most cases when you buy Power Pages, unless you're storing a tremendous amount of data, you often that will kind of get enough data through your entitlements. But if you're in one of those situations where you're storing a large amount of data or files in Dataverse, you may have to purchase additional capacity. But there are some Dataverse entitlements already included in Power Pages licensing. So if you haven't kind of got this already, Dataverse is a critical component of Power Pages. It is simply not possible to have a Power Pages site without a Dataverse environment. There would be nowhere for the content to live. There'd be nowhere for all the settings to live. The web application that's running in Azure, that is your Power Pages site, when it loads up, the first thing it basically tries to do is it talks to Dataverse and figures out, okay, what side am I showing here? So it is just not possible to have a Power Pages site without Dataverse. Now, when we talk about the actual business data exposed on a Power Pages site, it is not a requirement that exists in Dataverse. So when I talk about business data here, what I'm referring to is, you have a portal. Generally, the whole point of having a Power Pages site is that your users are interacting with some sort of business data. So I'm not talking about like the content on the site, like the text or the images that appear on the site. I'm talking about the rows of data. You're creating cases, you're creating opportunities, whatever that business data that you're interacting with, does not necessarily have to come from Dataverse, but the kind of the metadata, the configuration of how the website looks, how it operates, that comes from Dataverse. So there is no getting around having Dataverse on your in terms of creating a Power Pages site. When you create a Power Pages site, it must be within a Dataverse environment. Now, you may have multiple sites within a single environment, but every site must be within that environment. One kind of side note here is that there are some settings. Dataverse isn't actually the only database used by Power Pages. There are other settings, and some examples here I've provided is whether the WAF or the CDN is enabled, settings related to custom domains, maintenance mode, custom errors. There are a number of settings that are not stored in Dataverse. So technically, if we kind of go back here a couple of slides here, what's kind of missing here is actually there's another database somewhere that's storing some of those configurations. Whether that's stored kind of I don't think it's on the web server. So I think there is some other database that contains some settings. It's not in this picture, but there is another database. So that's why if you were to do a backup of, like if you were to take your Dataverse environment, create a copy and spin up a Power Pages site, there would be things that would not be the same. Again, there's things like WAF. Just because the fact that the WAF is enabled for a site is not stored in Dataverse. So if you create a copy, you create another Dataverse environment with Power Pages, and you kind of spin up that site, the WAF will not be the same. It will not be turned on because the setting as to whether WAF is enabled is not stored in Dataverse. So there is that kind of other database, but the vast majority, like most of what we're doing when we're building Power Pages, is stored in Dataverse. So let's talk a little bit more about that business data. So if that business data doesn't exist in Dataverse, then why would you use Power Pages? And honestly, like that's a real question that I ask people. If someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I got data that exists in this Oracle database. I want to use Power Pages." My first question is why. Now, there are good answers to that, and there's reasons why you might want to do that. But there's many times where it's like, well, this may not be the right fit. If your data is in Dataverse, then it is much more likely that this is the product for you, because that was the original intention behind this product, is let's show data from Dataverse to kind of external audiences. That's its kind of core competency. But that doesn't mean there may be some cases where you do want to show data. Now, I would say the most common reason that you would want to use Power Pages while also using data from outside Dataverse is when the project is a combination of data from Dataverse and other places. So maybe 80% of the data is in Dataverse, but there's 20% that you got to pull from elsewhere. That's a great, often that there'll still be a great use case for Power Pages there. That extra 20% you can handle with some of these techniques that we'll talk about. But if you come to me and say, "Hey, I just want to use Power Pages because Microsoft, we're all in on the Power Platform, and I've got a portal that we need to build, and all the data is in Oracle. Should I use Power Pages?" Again, the answer isn't necessarily no, but you then have to just like, what is it that you think you're getting out of Power Pages that justifies kind of building this out? Because again, there are ways to do it, but I wouldn't say that's like the core competency of the product. So, what are the ways that we can talk to other data sources? It's either via Dataverse, so you can do an integration with Dataverse. So think of it as like any sort of like real-time synchronization with Dataverse. You have Azure functions or other processes running in the cloud, webhooks that are keeping a copy of the data from the other system up to date in Dataverse. And so in that case, Power Pages is still interacting with Dataverse. And then when you save back to Dataverse, maybe it pushes back to the old system, to the other system. So if you integrate Dataverse with that other system, then Power Pages can leverage that data. I would say the most popular way, especially recently, to do these types of integrations would be using the virtual tables concept in Dataverse. So if you're not familiar with virtual tables are a way to have a data represented as a table in Dataverse, but the data doesn't actually reside in Dataverse. It's basically pulled kind of in real time. So it's almost like, so you ask Dataverse, hey, I want this particular, let's say you use it for invoices stored in a third party system. So you create this like custom invoice virtual table, and so when you say, hey, I want all the invoices from last month, when you do a query to the APIs, it's actually then doing a query underneath the scenes directly to that other data source and pulling the data in real time. So even though it acts and appears as if it's coming from Dataverse, you can use that on Power Pages. You can use it in model-driven apps. You can use it all these different use cases because it looks like from the API level that the data exists in Dataverse. If you looked actually kind of under the hood, it's just doing those real-time API calls to those other systems. So again, because that from an API perspective, it appears as if that data is in Dataverse, Power Pages doesn't really know the difference between whether it's in Dataverse or not. Now, there are certainly some limitations with virtual tables that you should be aware of if you're going to do it. So it's not 100% perfect, but it's certainly kind of the most popular way to do that. Because as soon as you build that virtual table into Dataverse, that opens up a whole bunch of possibilities in terms of using it for Power Automate or Power BI or anything, because now within the Power Platform, it looks like that data is kind of in Dataverse, and the Power Platform kind of prefers Dataverse as its data store. So there can be lots of benefits to going that route. But depending on kind of what the APIs look like for that other data source, it certainly can be challenging as well. Another option, and this was probably before virtual tables came out, was probably maybe the most popular way, is rather than integrating via Dataverse, you integrate directly from code, a client-side code that exists on Power Pages. So you can write JavaScript on Power Pages that it calls directly some third-party APIs or through what's called the companion app. So you write the JavaScript code, whether that's a React single page app or just some kind of more kind of old school JavaScript that does AJAX calls to an API. You can properly authenticate that using OAuth implicit grant flow. So you can do it securely, but you're calling another API rather than calling back to the Power Pages web server or to Dataverse. You're calling some other third party API directly, and that was a very popular way to do things for sure for many years. So that's another way that you could do it. You can also use kind of Power Automate via the web API. You can call Power Automate. So if your data exists in another system that you can access with the connector, you can call like Power Automate kind of on demand to pull data as well. So this list isn't exhaustive. There are maybe some other ways to get at data from Dataverse, but know that it is possible. But again, the question I always ask is, if all of your data resides elsewhere, why is it that you feel strongly that you want to use Power Pages? It's certainly not the cheapest option that exists in terms of licensing. And so if you're going to end up if you're going with that custom integration options, where you're essentially just writing a whole bunch of JavaScript code that talks to an API, what is it that you're getting? What's the value you're getting out of Power Pages? Power Pages really shines when that data is in Dataverse. If you're not dealing with any data in Dataverse, again, I've seen situations where it still does make sense, but I think too often people just think of it as, it's like kind of a web development platform. Well, it's kind of a low-code platform if you're using Dataverse. If you're not using Dataverse, it's significantly less kind of low-code, no-code. Quick check here on the questions. So no, I don't see any questions yet. So I will keep going here. So what features does Power Pages use from Dataverse? So let's talk first about some of the kind of core Dataverse features. So it certainly uses tables and columns. So the fact that within Dataverse, you can create new tables, you can add columns to tables. Power Pages definitely leverages that functionality. Whether it's being used by the kind of the core product for kind of web pages and web files and all that sort of stuff, or when you're creating your own custom tables, or whether you're using some of the common data model tables like accounts and contacts to kind of manage the business. Power Pages heavily relies on the fact that Dataverse has tables and columns and all that sort of stuff. You can leverage business rules, but probably not in the way that you think or hope. So it is important to note that business rules, when you're using the forms technology, business rules, Power Pages kind of ignores those. But if you create business rules that run on the server side, so kind of like table level business rules, because all that goes back through Dataverse, those types of things will be respected. So some use of business rules, but probably not as much as you'd like. Classic workflows. So of course, if you use Power Pages to update data, create data, that sort of thing, classic workflows can trigger based on that. But there's also certain features on lists and forms that allow you to kind of execute workflows, give users buttons to run a workflow. So I would say that classic workflows are probably better supported right now in Power Pages than Power Automate is. With Power Automate, we have the ability to access them through the API. But I would say using Power Automate on Power Pages is not low code, where using classic workflows in Power Pages is low code at this point. We certainly use the ALM capabilities of Dataverse, especially now more recently that Power Pages has become solution aware, so that the way that you can move data between environments is using those solutions. So Power Pages definitely leverages those capabilities, as well as the search. So a few years back, the search capabilities within Power Pages were transitioned to use Dataverse Search. Historically, they used a technology called Lucene.net, which was kind of built more into Power Pages specifically. But there was a time where things got that got switched over, and so now Power Pages is using the Dataverse search capabilities. Let's see here. So those are kind of the core features of Dataverse. Now, again, I'll kind of, there's a distinction between, okay, well, what's model-driven Power Apps, what's Dataverse? So in terms of like, how does Power Pages rely on model-driven Power Apps? Well, the views that you create are the way that you drive lists in Power Pages. The forms that you use to create basic forms and multi-step forms within Power Pages, those forms are coming from, again, the kind of the model-driven apps, the model-driven Power Apps world as well. And the other thing is that the actual administration interface. So there's actually, probably at least 3 admin interfaces for Power Pages. You've got the Power Platform Admin Center, you've got the Design Studio, and then you've got the Management app. The Management app is a model-driven Power App built in Dataverse. So Power Pages relies on model-driven Power Apps as one of the ways that you can administer it. And there are still things that you can still do you can exclusively do them within the model-driven Management app. So there's certainly a dependency on Power Pages there to use that particular functionality. So lots of things from model-driven Power Apps and kind of the old traditional CRM, dynamic CRM world. Again, back in the day, you didn't have to think about, okay, was it, in CRM, you'd build tables and you'd build your forms, reviews, and that was all kind of one piece. Now it's like, you could probably have a pretty good discussion about, is a view a part of Power Apps or is a view part of Dataverse? But certainly those are things needed by Power Pages. So I also want to mention what are the features of Dataverse that aren't used by Power Pages, because there are things in Dataverse that may seem like Power Pages would use those, but it actually doesn't. So the big one that often trips people up, if someone comes from a background where they understand, they know Dataverse, maybe they're a dynamic CRM developer for years, and they come to Power Pages and they think, okay, I know how security works. It's business units and ownership and all that sort of stuff. Power Pages couldn't care less about those things. Now, that's maybe not as true as much anymore. Like there is a motion from Microsoft that they're kind of consolidating it, but it's still easiest now to assume that Power Pages has its own security model. It's built using tables in Dataverse, the web roles tables, the table permissions, and so the security model that exists in Dataverse for model-driven apps or kind of access to the web API is very different than the security model that exists in Power Pages. So the other thing is that there is a separate web API. So the Power Pages Web API is not the same as the Dataverse Web API. Now, again, there's certainly some similarities. The Power Pages Web API, think of it as a layer on top of the Dataverse one, where it enforces the permissions that should exist in Power Pages. But it is not the same Web API, nor should you attempt to figure out how to call the Dataverse API directly from your Power Pages site. I mean, someone could absolutely prove me wrong if they want to, but as far as I know, there's really no good secure way, unless your users who are logging into your Power Pages site are Entra ID users. There's no secure way to directly call the Power Pages, or sorry, the Dataverse API from a Power Pages site. You'd have to embed something in the JavaScript that would not be a secure way to do that. Again, unless your users are licensed Dataverse users that are logging into Power Pages as well. So if you require access to Dataverse, the Dataverse APIs from Power Pages, you either can go through the Power Pages Web API, which, like I said, is a layer on top, but doesn't necessarily have all the features. Like, so for example, within the Power Pages Web API, you are not able to invoke, say, a custom message. You can invoke kind of a custom API. That's not possible through the Power Pages Web API right now. So if you really need to do that, one option is to create a companion app where you, which is basically kind of like a proxy server almost, where you call the companion app, and then that companion app has the credentials and the information necessary to call the Dataverse API. So that was a common technique that we used a lot before the Web API was available, and still is an option if there's things that you need to do that aren't possible through the Power Pages Web API. But it's important to note that they are different. That they are kind of similar. I would say that in terms of functionality, Power Pages is a subset of the Dataverse Web API. And if you're not paying too close attention, they may seem like they might be the same Web API, but there's lots of things within the Power Pages Web API that you cannot do. There's things within the Dataverse Web API that you cannot do within Power Pages. So something to be aware of if you're new to this space. All right. So what are the key takeaways? If I haven't mentioned it enough already, Dataverse is required for Power Pages. Don't spend any time or effort thinking, how can I do this without Dataverse? It fundamentally depends on certain Dataverse features for basically being able to create the kind of low code, no code experience for building Power Pages is completely dependent on having Dataverse there. Power Pages does provide the best value when working with business data from Dataverse, but options do exist if you're trying to pull in business data from other systems. Again, to me, the best examples of that are if you have a site that needs to talk to both Dataverse and something else, then Power Pages can often still be a good fit. If your site is only pulling from other data sources, then it's probably more of a question mark. So if you're new to Power Pages and you don't really know what Dataverse is, it is like a key skill. It's a key thing that you need to understand. So it is something that's worth kind of investing in understanding how Dataverse works. It's like, you're trying to, not knowing how the database works that you're building on top of. It is a key component. So if you're new to Power Pages, if you're working with Power Pages and you're not familiar with Dataverse, definitely recommend investing some time learning about Dataverse, because it is absolutely a key component of the product. All right. So that's what I want to cover today as part of our kind of Dataverse and Power Pages session. So I will keep moving on here. I know we have, we'll talk about the next call. So the next call will be February 12th, same typical time, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific time. Now I know we've got a number of minutes left here. We were pretty short on news this week, so that didn't take up a whole lot of time. So I am certainly open to any questions that people may have. Feel free to drop that in the chat. I think I've dealt with the one that's come up so far. So I'll leave you a minute or two to do that while I wait to see if any questions pop up. And again, whether they're related to today's topic or any other topic related to Power Page, certainly happy to get into that discussion. But in the meantime, let's talk about our good friends at MS Dynamics World. Again, saying thank you to Jason and the team there. Yeah, keep an eye out on your emails from him. There'll be recordings and an invite to next month calls. Next month call. All right, let's jump into Q&A. So we do have one question. Any licensing changes coming up? Not that I'm aware of. I mean, yeah, if there was something that's, yeah, short answer is no. I'm not aware of any licensing changes. Trying to think of what, for many years, there was lots of feedback, I would say, that we were providing to the product team about how licensing needs to change. I would say that those conversations are pretty minimal these days. I mean, people can talk about, um, the cost of Power Pages licensing. It's certainly not the cheapest option out there. But I would say that at least I think they've got the model right in terms of how it's licensed. So I haven't really kind of heard anything. I don't know if there'd be any kind of price cuts or significant changes. I know we're all kind of dealing with the change or with the removal of the kind of the per app licenses, which was kind of a big deal here recently, but I'm not aware of any licensing changes, nor have I heard lots of advocacy for any big changes. Of course, everyone would like it to be cheaper, but that's not a piece of feedback I'm giving Microsoft every day. I think they know what they're charging for it, and again, I'm not aware of any licensing changes. Aaron's also asking thoughts on Power Pages for small business using Dataverse. You know what? We work with organizations that are small, that are big. Again, like I think I've said it a few times. Just if the data's in Dataverse, then often it's a really good fit. So yeah, lots of organizations, like, it's kind of a quick and it can be an easy way to do that. We work with lots of organizations that are single digit employees, 10, 12 employees, that sort of thing. So it's not the kind of thing that you're going to spin up in a weekend. There is a learning curve to it. We work with lots of kind of clients to help them kind of get over that learning curve a little bit, just to kind of help eliminate some of that. But I see lots of organizations use it pretty successfully. And I mean, the primary thing is that, hey, it's this thing from Microsoft. There's that level of trust with a Microsoft product compared to building it yourself or some other kind of third-party product. So it being part of the Microsoft family is certainly a big seller. And then Aaron's also asking about Power Pages and agents. So I'll be the first to admit that the AI stuff is not necessarily where I spend a lot of my time. I'm not aware of there being anything super exciting recently coming with agents. I know that there was a new security agent, but that was more for Microsoft has an agent running behind the scenes to check up on your Power Pages site and to identify if it's used for phishing attacks and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not aware of there being anything specific to Power Pages and how you embed, say, an agent on your site or anything like that. So I'm not aware of anything exciting coming there. I know that the release notes, we got a release wave coming up in a few months, so I'm not sure what the status is of when the release notes are coming out. But I suspect that's why things are a little quiet now. We're kind of dealing with the holidays. But typically things news starts kind of trickling out now here over the next couple of weeks to see if there's anything kind of exciting coming up. But yeah. Let's see. Did I knock off all the questions here? I think so. Looks like that's probably it for Aaron, and I don't see any other questions. So folks, really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to sit and listen to me talk about Power Pages. And looking forward to doing it again next month on the 12th. Hope to see you there. If you have any topics that you would like to see covered, there's a way to submit those suggestions via our website, or you can drop them in the chat. Always looking to, these things are the best if we're covering topics that are important to the people who attend the calls. So let me know if you have any topics that you really want to cover. With that, I think we could probably wrap it up there for today, Jason.
All right. Thanks again, Nick. Thanks to everyone in the audience. We will be in touch soon. Bye.